The White House has made its first comment since President Trump sparked a row by saying that NATO troops had stayed a little off the front lines during the war in Afghanistan. Britain's Prime Minister Sir Keir Starmer said the words were insulting and appalling. Prince Harry, who served in Afghanistan, has called for the sacrifices of NATO soldiers to be spoken about truthfully and with respect.
So, the White House finally spoke up after President Trump stirred up quite a bit of controversy with his remarks about NATO troops in Afghanistan. Britain's Prime Minister Sir Keir Starmer found the comments pretty insulting and appalling. It's worth mentioning that Prince Harry, who has experience serving in Afghanistan, emphasized the importance of talking about the sacrifices made by NATO soldiers with respect and honesty. This morning, newspapers from The Times to The Express all pretty much echoed the same thing. They want an apology from President Trump. His remarks really hit a nerve, downplaying the contributions and sacrifices made by NATO and British troops during the war back in 2006.
After his comments sparked outrage and offence, belittling the sacrifices made by NATO and British troops during the Afghanistan war in 2006.
We have never really asked anything of them. You know, they'll say they sent some troops to Afghanistan or this or that. And they did. They stayed a little back.
The conflict was triggered after the US asked for NATO allies to help battle the Taliban in the aftermath of the September the 11th attacks.
Let's break it down. He mentioned something like, "We've never really asked anything of them," while referring to NATO's involvement, claiming they stayed a bit back from the front lines. This all comes after the US requested assistance from NATO allies to combat the Taliban after the tragic events of September 11th. Now, it's important to note that when the President of the United States, who leads the most powerful country in the world, decides to be absent from the global stage.
Well, the White House's Deputy Press Secretary said that Mr. Trump was right to have stressed that America's contribution to NATO dwarfed those of other countries. There was no direct response to the outrage caused. Lee Milner reports.
From The Times to The Express, newspapers across the nation led this morning with a single demand: an apology from President Trump. It comes after his comments sparked outrage and offence.
It raises some eyebrows. We're talking about a crucial time when America's interests and alliances are at stake. Donald Trump seems to have gone missing from international leadership just when the world needs the U.S. to step up the most. Meanwhile, congressional members preparing impeachment papers are taking notice of his absence. They view it not just as poor diplomatic skills, but as a failure to meet one of the most basic responsibilities of the presidency. And guess what? The paperwork for his removal is already being drafted.
The framers of the Constitution prescribed a clear remedy for presidents who so violate their oath of office. That is the power of impeachment. Today, in service to our duty to the Constitution and to our country, the House Committee on the Judiciary is introducing 2 articles of impeachment charging the President of the United States, Donald J. Trump, with committing high crimes and misdemeanors.
It's pretty wild to think about how President Trump seems to really struggle with history. There's this saying that goes, "Engage brain before opening mouth." And honestly, he could take a lesson from that. It stirred up some serious reactions, especially from Prime Minister Sir Keir Starmer, who labeled Trump's comments as both insulting and appalling, noting the hurt they have caused. Prince Harry even chimed in, emphasizing that the sacrifices made in places like Helmand need to be talked about with honesty and respect.
It prompted a strong response from the Prime Minister, Sir Keir Starmer, who called the President's remarks insulting and appalling and was not surprised that they have caused such hurt. Prince Harry, who did 2 tours of Helmand, said those sacrifices deserve to be spoken of truthfully and with respect.
Let's take a look at what's been going on in the world recently, because Trump's behavior is really something else. It almost feels like we're watching a leader who might have lost interest in governing properly, or maybe even lost the ability to do so. He completely skipped out on the 2025 G20 summit in South Africa. For those who might not know, the G20 is a significant gathering of leaders from the world's 20 largest economies. These nations represent nearly 40% of the global population and the bulk of the world's economic activity. While all these important leaders were busy negotiating vital trade agreements and climate commitments that will impact international relations for years to come.
So Keir Starmer issuing that statement following those words from President Trump when he spoke to Fox News, something that has caused an awful lot of upset. We've been seeing that across the day here on BBC News when he said that we've never needed them, talking about NATO allied forces, saying they'll say that they sent some troops to Afghanistan, and they did. They stayed a little back, a little off the front lines.
The President of the United States chose to stay home. His absence, as reported by the Associated Press, could further hurt America's reputation in a space where leadership has always been expected. While everyone else was in the room discussing decisions vital for American workers, businesses, and national security, Trump was off somewhere else, completely disconnected. And as if that wasn't enough, he went on to announce that South Africa would be barred from taking part in the 2026 G20, which the United States will host. This major economy with 60 million people, a founding member of the G20, was told by the American president that they aren't welcome at the table.
Moving on, US President Donald Trump has announced that South Africa would not be invited to next year's G20 summit in Miami, taking his diplomatic offensive against the country to a next level. Now, Trump cited what he described as horrific human rights abuses endured by white farmers and South Africa's refusal to symbolically hand off the G20 presidency at the end of this year's summit to the U.S.
The reasoning behind this diplomatic slap in the face from the White House made waves for being quite extraordinary. There's a lot going on with Trump, and it's honestly hard to believe. He's been spreading false stories about land seizures and how white farmers are treated in South Africa. These are claims that fact checkers and international observers have repeatedly shot down. Despite that, he took these misleading narratives, amplified them on his political platform, and then went ahead to ban an entire country from what many see as the most significant economic meeting globally. South African officials didn't hold back, calling the decision regrettable and based on misinformation, while diplomats deemed it an unprecedented breach of G20 protocol. Meanwhile, Democrats in Congress are calling it out for what it really is, an abuse of presidential power stemming from racial grievances rather than a true national interest. And let's not forget about Greenland. That obsession of his just won't go away. Trump's bizarre fixation on trying to acquire this Nordic territory, which belongs to Denmark, a NATO ally, seems to spotlight some real issues with his mental state as president. Text messages came to light revealing Trump told the Prime Minister of Norway that he no longer feels the need to prioritize peace because he didn't get the Nobel Peace Prize. He actually linked that personal disappointment to his desire for Greenland. Imagine that. The President of the United States saying he's stepping away from peace in American foreign policy because his feelings were hurt over an award and somehow tying that to threats against an ally's territory. This sentiment didn't sit well with Senator Ed Markey and other Democrats who have called for him to be removed under the 25th Amendment. They argue that when a president's approach to foreign policy is driven by bitterness over a Nobel Prize, there's a serious question about his mental fitness to fulfill his presidential duties. Now, what really ties all these issues together, the absence from summits, the South Africa ban, and the fixation on Greenland, makes this situation incredibly politically charged. There are already formal impeachment articles written and waiting in the congressional record. They were introduced by Representative Al Green in December of 2025, outlining the impeachment of Donald John Trump for high crimes and misdemeanors. This resolution brands him as an abuser of presidential power, one who incites violence, fosters hate, and undermines democracy. Trump's actions on the world stage are raising a lot of eyebrows, and it's honestly hard to believe he said some of the things he has. So, the House took a vote on a resolution, and while they decided to table it, that doesn't mean it's over. The resolution is still on file, and its language is still very much alive. The charges in there, like abuse of power and promoting violence, describe what Trump is doing right now with an eerie precision. For instance, he's skipping big events like the G20, leaving world leaders to make decisions without any American input. That kind of behavior really shows a lack of presidential responsibility. Then there's the incident with South Africa, where he used misinformation and racial grievances to justify a ban. That's a clear abuse of power. And let's not forget the threats he's made against allied territories over some personal issues, which look like he's promoting violence for his own reasons. What's interesting is that these charges were drafted before any of these recent headlines came out. Yet, they fit so well, it feels like they could have predicted his actions. Right now, Democrats are working a dual strategy: impeachment under Article 2 and considering removal under the 25th Amendment. It creates a messy situation for Republicans who might think they can defend Trump with just one angle. On the impeachment side, they're saying he's abusing power and ought to be removed. Meanwhile, the 25th Amendment approach points to mental unfitness. If a Republican argues Trump's foreign policies are just normal presidential judgment, then they also have to explain why he seems to make those decisions based on bitterness over a Nobel Prize in misinformation. And if they claim he's completely rational, they still have to justify why a rational president would skip major summits and make threats based on personal vendettas. It's a tangled web for sure. Trump's absence from the world stage is creating quite the sticky situation, and it actually lays out evidence for multiple issues at once. It's something I really want to highlight, especially when you think about what this means for him as we head into the midterms. Most of the legal troubles he's dealing with, like criminal cases, immunity hearings, and those Epstein files, are pretty complicated. They require a good amount of legal know-how for people to grasp why they matter. But then they're skipping the G20. It doesn't get any simpler than that. Banning South Africa is straightforward. And when he threatened Greenland over a Nobel Prize, no special legal training is needed to see how odd that is. These failings are clear-cut, relatable, and they resonate emotionally with voters who don't need any complex analysis to understand them. People can easily see that the president isn't fulfilling his duties on the global stage. Instead, he seems to be embarrassing the nation in front of others, making decisions fueled by personal grudges rather than what's best for the country. It's a straightforward situation that just takes some common sense to see. And this is exactly what influences voting behavior during midterm elections. Now, let's talk about the stark visual contrast between Trump's absence and the presence of other world leaders. Opposition campaigns are going to make the most of this. Just think about those group photos of G20 leaders where there's an empty space where the American president should be. It's like free advertising for the opposition. Every clip of world leaders engaging and making decisions without any American involvement sends a strong visual message about the president failing at his most basic responsibilities. And every headline detailing the Greenland threats or the South Africa ban serves as a reminder that when Trump does decide to interact with the world, it's often driven by personal obsession rather than any sort of strategic vision. His conduct on the world stage just keeps giving the opposition fresh material for their messages, delivering new blunders and embarrassments that align perfectly with campaign cycles. On top of that, the international community's reactions to Trump's behavior are starting to play into the impeachment narrative. When South African officials say the G20 ban is based on misinformation, or when European allies raise concerns about the Greenland situation, it just adds more fuel to the fire. When the leaders of allied nations start to voice their concerns about American leadership, it really packs a punch. It's one thing for Democrats to claim that Trump is misusing his power on a global scale, but when those international voices echo the same critique, it changes the game entirely. We're talking about countries that usually want to keep good relations with the United States, feeling compelled to speak out. This widespread agreement that Trump's approach to foreign policy is unpredictable and even harmful certainly adds weight to the impeachment charges because it shows that this isn't just a partisan issue. It's a shared concern among countries around the globe. Let's take a closer look now at how Trump missing out on the world stage is not merely a diplomatic faux pas, but actually a constitutional setback that directly impacts the impeachment process in Congress. The role of the president as the main diplomat for the United States is fundamental, not optional. The Constitution, specifically Article 2, lays this out clearly, noting that the president has the power to receive ambassadors, negotiate treaties, and engage with foreign powers. So when Trump skips a G20 summit, he's not simply missing a meeting. He's neglecting a vital duty that the Constitution hands to him. And that has real consequences, not just embarrassing ones. His absence at the G20 in South Africa didn't just leave an empty seat. It meant he wasn't there for crucial discussions and negotiations. The other leaders didn't hold off waiting for him. They moved forward making deals and setting the rules around international trade, finance, and security decisions that impact the United States whether Trump was present or not. Key topics around supply chain coordination, digital currency regulations, and climate financing were tackled without American input simply because the president chose not to engage. Meanwhile, nations like China, Germany, Japan, India, and Brazil jumped in to fill the void left by his absence, directing the outcomes in ways that serve their interests. The decision to ban South Africa from the next summit is a game share, and it really crosses a line that has never been crossed in G20 history. The G20 isn't just a social club where the host gets to kick out members over personal issues. It's a place for the world's top economies to come together and tackle common challenges by saying South Africa can't attend the gathering in 2026. Trump is essentially using this international platform as a tool for his own domestic agenda. It's quite alarming how this move is based on misleading stories about land seizures and white farmers highlighting some troubling racial implications that seriously hurt America's credibility with developing nations. Now, when South African officials responded publicly, they kept it diplomatic, labeling the ban as regrettable and rooted in misinformation. But it's not just South Africa that's feeling the impact. Every developing nation in the G20, countries in Africa, Asia, and Latin America are now left wondering if the United States might just decide to ban them too if they get on the wrong side of the American president's politics. That's a question that really erodes the multilateral framework the United States has nurtured for over 70 years. And then there's the whole obsession with Greenland, which adds another layer of absurdity to this situation. Honestly, there's no practical reason for the United States to try and acquire Greenland through force. Greenland is an autonomous region of Denmark, a close NATO ally that the U.S. is committed to protecting. Any move to take Greenland through threats or aggression would really just be an act of war against an ally. The situation with Greenland is raising eyebrows, and honestly, it's a bit of a head-scratcher. The president's remarks about potentially threatening NATO's collective defense against the United States itself, mind you, are not just diplomatically out of line. They simply don't make any strategic sense. It's honestly hard to believe he linked this to his personal feelings about the Nobel Peace Prize, telling Norway's prime minister that he feels no obligation to focus solely on peace now that he didn't get that recognition. This twist turns what was already confusing into something truly irrational. Behind the scenes, the diplomatic community is reacting much more strongly than what you might see in public discussions. Former diplomats and retired military personnel are calling these threats the most destabilizing behavior from a president toward a NATO ally since the alliance was created. Denmark, which holds sovereignty over Greenland, is a founding NATO member that has stood shoulder to shoulder with the United States in conflicts like those in Afghanistan and Iraq. They've lost troops in battles. The U.S. asked them to join, and now here we are with the U.S. president suggesting taking their territory simply because of a personal grievance. What a betrayal. This isn't just a slap in the face to our allies. It jeopardizes the very framework of collective security that,